Good afternoon and welcome to the Universal Waste Workshop. As people are still coming into our workshop, I'll give a couple of guidelines. By participating in this meeting, you understand that this meeting is being recorded. And if you could please mute for background noise. During the Q&A, please focus on the related topic of today only. We'll do our best to listen and address all comments and questions so that everyone has the opportunity to participate. Thank you for your patience and understanding. I will now give some instructions for language. This workshop will be broadcast in English and Spanish, and each participant must select a preferred language to hear in the workshop. We'll walk through these steps. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see the little globe, and it says interpretation. You go there, and everyone has to pick their language, either English or Spanish. If you are calling in, you could use the phone number area code 877-920-8432, and you enter the code 741-502#. Si está llamando en español y necesita interpretación por teléfono, el número es 877-920-8432 y el código es 741-502 y pound. Automated closed captions have been turned on for this meeting. You can turn them off by clicking the CC icon or move the captions box. Now we will start, and I will turn it over to Ryan Dominguez.
Thank you, Elsa, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to the first workshop for the Hazardous Waste Management Plan program. My name is Ryan Dominguez. I'm the Supervising Hazardous Substances Engineer for the unit. This unit was formed at the beginning of 2022 to implement the requirements of California Health and Safety Code 25135. The primary purpose of the Hazardous Waste Plan unit is to prepare hazardous waste management plans for presentation to the Board of Environmental Safety. These plans will be based on hazardous waste management reports and will serve as comprehensive planning documents, sources of useful information, and guides for implementation of dtsc's hazardous waste management program. Now, the first hazardous waste management plan is due in March of 2025 and is to be completed every 3 years afterwards. To get to this first plan, the first thing we are to complete is a hazardous waste management report that includes available information. Now, this first report is due in a tight 8 months, or March 1st, 2023, and subsequent reports are to be completed every 3 years as well. Now, this report will serve as a starting point for our updated understanding of hazardous waste management from the cradle to the grave in California. We also anticipate identifying missing information and determining how to obtain the missing information. So far, we focused our efforts on collecting available information related to waste generation, transportation, treatment, and disposal, and then getting the data into systems for our initial analysis. In order to share out the required wide-ranging subject matter efficiently, we anticipate holding additional workshops in the coming months on specific topics as the information becomes available So you can learn the status of the current hazardous waste management program along with us. Now, today's workshop will be focused on universal waste and will be presented by Sylvia Bauer, an environmental scientist in our unit. Universal waste is a very complex portion of the hazardous waste management program, and information about these hazardous wastes lives in a scattering of databases and reports. We will open up the workshop to answer questions and comments at the end of Sylvia's presentation. You can submit questions using the Q&A function or save them to ask verbally when Sylvia is finished. We do ask that the questions and or comments that you have today relate to the topic at hand, which is universal waste, for the report. However, please contact us. Please contact us after the workshop with questions or comments related to other topics as well for our consideration. Our email address will be shown a couple of times throughout our presentation and is available on our website and is also in the chat. The slides used in this presentation are also available on our website, and a recording of this presentation should also be available online on our website in the next week or two. Now with that, I will stop talking and pass it on over to Sylvia. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ryan. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sylvia Bauer, and like Ryan said, I am an environmental scientist with the Department of Toxic Substances Control, or DTSC. When I am not working, I am usually bird watching or looking for rocks in the desert. And when I am working, I am part of the Hazardous Waste Management Plan Unit. We are a newly formed unit that is addressing the Hazardous Waste Management Plan, which is due in 2025. Now, the first step of the development of the plan is the development of the report, which will include information on hazardous waste managed in California, such as types and amounts. We're looking into where this information lives, how to access it, what data we're missing, and how we plan to tackle data gaps. That being said, we are still in the data gathering stage of the first report, and once the report is complete, we can use the report for the plan. So I've been looking at the universal wastes and household hazardous waste portions. And again, these are just portions of the entire report. Other workshops will tackle additional information in the future, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But without further ado, let's begin. So a couple of quick housekeeping items. Please make sure that you are using Google Chrome, Safari, or Firefox. Please submit any questions you have via the Q&A box. Camera and microphone features have been disabled for attendees. Quick reminder that the session will be recorded. And then finally, please make sure to complete session evaluation by the end of the session. And we will be answering questions at the end of the presentation. So before we begin, I'd like to mention that we have a website that has more information and also has our intro video up and running, including who we are and what we'd like to accomplish with these reports and these plans. We also have an e-list where you can sign up to receive updates, such as upcoming workshops. And finally, if you have questions or comments, please feel free to email us at dtsc_hwplan@dtsc.ca.gov. By using the email, we can log your questions and comments, and we can better craft our frequently asked questions page, or FAQ. So just as a brief heads up, we've got about 50 slides worth of material to go through today. So I do want to be clear on what we're going to cover. So the topics for today include the background of the report and plan, what is universal waste, our universal waste data so far, household hazardous waste, which is going to be HHW. We'll briefly talk about geographic information, including disadvantaged communities as defined in SB 535. We'll talk about data gaps that we've encountered so far. And then finally, we'll mention some of our future endeavors. So if we're not covering the topic that you're interested in today, please note that we will have future workshops which may cover the topic that you want more information on. So just a quick note before I walk through these, please note that these workshops are subject to change, both in subject matter and dates. So that being said, Keep an eye on our webpage for more information and to sign up for our e-list to stay up to date on these future workshops. Our possible future workshops include waste generation issues and the hazardous waste tracking system, transportation, and the evaluation of areas surrounding in-state and out-of-state destination facilities. So let's talk more about the background of the report and the plan. In 2021, Senate Bill 158 was approved, and this bill included changes to the Health and Safety Code 25135 and requires the completion of hazardous waste management reports and plans. The first report is due March 1st of 2023. The first plan is due March 1st of 2025. We are currently in the data gathering stage of the first report. This first iteration of the report is about finding out where the information lives, how we can access that information, the time it takes to gather this info. You get the idea. Once the report is complete, we can use the report to develop the plan. So long story short, the report and the plan are two separate entities, and we can use the report to develop the plan. And that 2023 is what we're aiming for first. So now that we have that figured out, what is universal waste? So universal waste is generated by multiple industries and households. So in short, everybody generates these wastes. That being said, the management of universal waste encourages recycling. And some examples that you may be familiar with include batteries, cathode ray tubes, or CRTs, photovoltaic modules, known as PV modules, so think solar panels, electronic devices, and fluorescent lamps. Please note that this is not a comprehensive list of universal waste types, just a couple that you may be familiar with already. So continuing with what is universal waste, there is no manifest required. Well, wait, what's a manifest? So the manifest is a document that is required to accompany hazardous waste from generator to transporter to treatment, storage, or disposal facility, or TSDF for short. And there is an example of a manifest on the right. So again, universal waste does not require a manifest. However, documents such as a log, receipts, bills of lading, or a manifest are required for record-keeping purposes and are required to be kept for 3 years. Some universal waste types have a tracking system associated with them, and different states have different universal wastes. So California's universal wastes could be different than, let's say, Nevada's universal wastes. So there are 3 types of regulated entities when it comes to universal waste. And the first of those that we'll cover is the handlers. Handlers can include generators of universal waste. A handler could also be a person who accepts and accumulates universal waste from others, or it could be a person who accepts universal waste and conducts certain treatment activities. Next, we'll look at transporters. And transporters could be a person in their own vehicle, a package delivery service, or a commercial carrier. And finally, there are destination facilities. And a destination facility is a fully regulated facility that treats, disposes of, or recycles a specific universal waste. Some examples of a destination facility include hazardous waste recycling facilities and landfills that accept hazardous waste. So before we hop into data, I have a quick disclaimer. So the following information is based on available data. That being said, this data may contain errors and it may be incomplete. Despite attempts to fix those errors, some of those may persist. So long story short, this data is preliminary and subject to changes. So these are the databases that we've used so far in terms of universal waste. So we'll talk about UED first, and that is the Universal Waste Electronic Devices Database. Next, we'll hop into the Thermostat Recycling Corporation database for thermostats and loose switches. So think Mercury. We have a dtsc battery survey for our battery information. The PV module report comes from the dtsc. Household hazardous waste information comes from CalRecycle's Household Hazardous Waste Collection Information Online from the Form 303. The California Environmental Reporting System is CERS, and we'll talk about that further in the presentation. And then for some of the facility information, we've been looking at EnviroStore, Rick Republic, and Cal EnviroScreen has been used for the Cal EnviroScreen 4.0 score. So like I said earlier, we're starting with UED data. And again, that's the Universal Waste Electronic Devices. So this is the handled waste. So think generated and collected waste. So an important highlight here is the difference between count and weight. There is not a conversion of count to weight available for electronic devices because we don't know if the device was as light as, let's say, a cell phone, or maybe as heavy as a television. So for now, count of electronic devices and tons of electronic devices are separate. When we look at the breakdown of handled waste in UED, the breakdown is as follows. 67% of the handled waste in 2021 was electronic devices. 19% is CRT devices, and those are devices that contain a CRT or a cathode ray tube. Bare CRT is 13%, and CRT glass is 1%. So I'd like to talk about the life of an electronic device. So note that the nature of the material changes as it goes through treatment and is broken down into components. These components could include metal, universal waste, plastic, such think yolks, and other materials. That being said, just keep that in mind as we start looking into these next slides. So this is a picture of the dismantling process. So you can see that some of the components of an electronic device are sitting on that countertop as that device is treated, or in this case, separated. So this is the handled waste versus the material that is received by destination facilities. The handled material is on the left, and the material received by destination facilities is on the right. It's important to note that the handled material on the left has those four categories that we saw earlier: electronic devices, CRT devices, bare CRT, and CRT glass. The material that destination facilities receive includes metal, yolks, unspecified universal waste, in addition to the electronic devices and other materials that we've seen on the left. So of the material that destination facilities receive, 42% is electronic devices, 34% is metal, 16% is cathode ray tubes, and 2% is CRT devices, 1% is unspecified universal waste. There's about 280 tons of yolks, which shows up as 0% on our pie graph, and CRT glass ends up being about 5% total. So what was generated or collected initially changes as it goes through treatment, doesn't necessarily stay the same. So where does the universal waste and those components, such as metal and yolks, go? 63% stays in the US. Mexico received 17% in 2021. Indonesia received 8%. South Korea received 6%. The Philippines received 3%. And Japan and Malaysia each received 1%. Canada received 0% according to our pie chart, but they did receive 30 tons of material. So this is just a visual representation of the pie graph that we just saw. Gray countries have no data, and light green is least material, and a dark green is more material. So again, that 63% results in that dark green United States, but you can see that Canada and Mexico did receive some of that material. Off to the right-hand side of the map, you can see some of those countries received material as well. So let's zoom into the United States. So again, gray states have no data. 63% of electronic device-related universal waste and components stay in California. The next three highest states that receive electronic device-related universal waste and components are Nevada at 11%, Arizona at 9%, and Oregon at 5%. And this map includes all states that received any amount of material, whether it was less than a ton, or in the case of California, 63% of those components. Speaking of California, let's zoom in one more time to California. So about 50% of the electronic device-related universal waste and components is sent to Los Angeles County. The second highest is San Bernardino County at 19%, and third is Alameda County at 9%. Again, just want to note that this is both universal waste, think batteries and electronic devices and such, and the components of those electronic devices as well. So also yolks and metals. So next, we're looking at mercury. So we've changed the chapter from UED into the Thermostat Recycling Corporation data. So this data is available on Thermostat Recycling Corporation's website, and this portion covers thermostats and loose switches. So these are collected in recycling boxes at businesses, and once they are full, those boxes, or once 1 year has passed since collection began, the box is shipped to the Veolia plant in Port Washington, Wisconsin. There, the mercury is retorted or purified and then sent to a precious metal supplier or prepared for long-term storage. So a quick and interesting note here is that there are 4 grams of mercury per switch, and there are 453 grams in a pound. So the 120 pounds that was collected in 2021 is a pretty significant amount of mercury. So this is the county breakdown of the amount of mercury collected through thermostats and loose switches. So of note, Riverside County had the most mercury reported, and Los Angeles County had the second highest amount of mercury collected in 2021. So next, we're going to talk about rechargeable battery types. So I'm going to go ahead and break these down a little bit for you, and we'll start with the top there, that Li-ion. Those are lithium ion batteries, and you can find those in portable electronics and electric vehicles. The NICD is for nickel cadmium. You can find these types of batteries in portable electronics and toys. The NIMH is for nickel metal hydride, and you can find these in consumer electronics, and they used to be found in prior generation electric vehicles. And then finally, small sealed lead acid batteries, which can be found in toys and home alarm systems. So these are the collected batteries in weight for 2021. And a quick note here is that this is from the dtsc battery survey. So this is based on responses to that survey. So for the lithium ion batteries, there were 150 tons collected. Nickel cadmium was 90 tons. Nickel metal hydride was 50 tons. And small sealed lead acid was 1,920 tons. So here's a visual representation of that. And this is a chart of battery collection by weight from 2016 to 2021. One thing to note is that there is an increasing trend in small sealed lead acid collection up until 2020, where it dips going into 2021. And you can see that small sealed lead acid battery collection soars above the other types of batteries and peaked in 2020. So if we wanted to look at those trends in those smaller battery types, we would have to omit the small sealed, which we can do right now. There we go. And so this is that same chart that we just saw, just with the small sealed lead acid batteries removed, so that we can see those trends in the other battery types a little easier. Of note, this data likely includes electric vehicle batteries as well. And going over this real quick, in 2018, nickel cadmium collection battery collection increased with a decrease in lithium ion battery collection. But overall, the trend shows a decrease in lithium ion and nickel cadmium collection, and the nickel metal hydride batteries tend to stay hovering around that 50-ton mark. So next on our list of universal waste types is PV modules, or photovoltaic modules. So again, think solar. PV modules were designated as a universal waste in 2021, and this data is collected through the dtsc. Real quick to note is that these are reported in either weight or count, and we'll talk about the data gaps associated with that later in this presentation. But basically, there is no conversion from count to weight at this time, because those modules can be made of lighter or heavier materials, and they can be different sizes. SIM handlers reported a weight of modules, and then the destination facilities sometimes reported a count, or vice versa. And we cannot assume that the count equals the same weight across those facilities. So the count of modules handled was 335, and the tons handled was 670 tons. So this is another county breakdown of the PV modules handled in tons in 2021. And just as a quick note, only weight is included for the purposes of this graph. This does not include count. So of note, Fresno County was the #1 handler of PV modules. Kern County was #2, and Sacramento County was #3. We can expect an increase in the PV module waste collection in the future, since the average life of solar panels is about 25 to 30 years. And in 2020, the California solar mandate required new single-family and multifamily dwellings of up to 3 stories high to include solar panels in their construction. This, in addition to the reliance on greener energy, will also likely increase solar panel waste. So as those panels are replaced or reach the end of their life, we will likely see the waste portion reflected in future data. That being said, 16 counties reported handling PV module waste. So please note again the difference in count versus weight. Count is modules and weight is in tons. So this is the PV modules and what ends up happening to those modules and where they go. So there were 335 modules recycled in California, and there were 750 modules recycled in other states. That being said, there were 80 tons of modules recycled in other states as well. So again, just highlighting the difference in count versus weight. 30 tons needed more data in California, and I'll discuss that in just a moment. And then there were 540 tons that were managed under reuse, recover, recycle, and other states. And I'll talk about that in just a moment as well. Finally, 250 modules were refurbished in other states. So of a quick note, it is important to note that there is a difference in recycled versus reuse, recover, recycle. There's no ambiguity in the panels that are recycled, but the reuse, recover, recycle means that panels that were not reused were recovered, and those that could not be reused or recovered were recycled. However, that destination facility did not break down how many of each category that ended up being. In terms of the more data needed, this is listed due to the way that the data sheet is currently set up. So if a facility handles panels and then sends them off to a destination facility, that destination facility has a column beyond it that lists what the facility is going to do with those panels. Now, that being said, if a facility handles panels and they don't send those off to a second facility, then that column ends up not being filled out. So for now, this just results in more data is needed because that column is not filled out. So this is a pie chart of the weight, not the count, And again, I just want to note the difference in the reuse, recover, recycle versus recycled. So the breakdown for those PV modules is 83% are managed under reuse, recover, recycle, 12% are managed as recycled, and 5% needed more data. That being said, 600 tons were sent to Texas. So Texas ended up being the main destination for most of these panels. Okay, so I've thrown a lot of data at you, and I've thrown a lot of numbers at you. So what does all of this mean? Well, all of this results in about 78,260 tons of total universal waste handled for 2021. And the breakdown is as follows. 65% is electronic devices, 18% is CRT devices. Again, those are devices that contain a cathode ray tube. 12% is bare CRT, or just the cathode ray tube itself. 1% is CRT glass, or the glass from a CRT. Batteries is 3%, and that includes the 4 types that we talked about earlier. 1% ends up being PV modules. And while we did have mercury collection, it did not appear on our pie chart, but it is important to note there were 0.06 tons of mercury, which is about 120 pounds. So on the left is that same pie chart that we just went over, but this is just highlighting that Los Angeles County was the #1 handler at 16% of the total universal waste handled. Imperial County handled 14%, and San Bernardino handled 11%. So this is a breakdown of the universal waste handled by county, and this is in tons and is for 2021. Quick note is that mercury is omitted due to its small amount, and counts of electronic devices and counts of photovoltaic modules are not included for graphing purposes. Batteries are also not included due to the lack of county data for batteries. So of note, the bare CRT, or the bare cathode ray tubes, handled in Imperial County soars above the other counties. This seems a little unusual. So of note is that this data is input by users. And that being said, mistakes can be made. And even small mistakes like adding an extra number on accident can result in extra tonnage when we're doing these graphing purposes. In addition, we can't fix every mistake that we come across without reaching out to the handlers. And in terms of going through data, UED alone for 2021 had over 9,000 lines of data. So it's quite a bit of data to go through to sort this stuff out sometimes. So one more note before we hop into the household hazardous waste portion of this, but we're looking at the 2021 totals for handlers and destination locations for the data sets that we just went over. So the universal waste handlers were about 2,560, and this includes the handlers listed in UED, Thermostat Recycling Corporation handlers, and PV, or photovoltaic module handlers. The ratio ends up being about 7 handlers to every 1 destination, and not every handler is the same. Some are going to handle more, some handle less, and some handle different materials. Next is the facilities with treatment activity. And of those facilities, there were 56 in UED. So what this means is that 56 facilities recorded treatment activities in UED. And finally, there were 289 locations that received material. So think destinations. 160 of those were in California, 111 were in other states, and 18 were outside the US. So that being said, the other locations could include fully regulated destination facilities or other locations that received universal waste or components. This is a work in progress, and we are still working on identifying what these locations are and what they do. So next, we're hopping into household hazardous waste. And why include household hazardous waste in a presentation about universal waste? Well, the answer is some household hazardous waste can be universal waste. Think about it. Maybe you have rechargeable batteries hanging out in a drawer somewhere. Or maybe you have a cell phone that you haven't used since the early 2000s. Or maybe you have an aerosol can that still has a little bit of something in it. These are universal wastes. So I've got one more disclaimer for you here. Again, this is based on available data, and this data is not combined with data from other reporting agencies, including the information that we just walked through in the previous slides. The reason being that we want to keep this separate so we don't accidentally introduce duplicates from one database into another, since there may be overlapping information in different databases. So that being said, the total household hazardous waste tons for 2020-2021 ends up being about 65,020 tons. And this came from the Form 303 with CalRecycle. CalRecycle takes that Form 303 data and it's put into their household hazardous waste collection information online. Some counties had no reported data, and this included Plumas, Mendocino, and Colusa. I reached out to CalRecycle to see why that might be. And one potential reason could be that there may have been COVID-related staff reductions or a cease of collections, or that material might have been being collected at a different county for that time. In addition, one location can sometimes serve multiple counties. So this is looking at the breakdown of the 65,020 tons of household hazardous waste collected in 2020-2021. So when we look at that breakdown on the left in that pie chart, we see that of that 65,000 tons, 51% ends up being universal waste. 24% ends up being reclaimable tons, so think recyclable oil filters for one example, and 25% ends up being other household hazardous waste. When we look at where this was handled, we see that Los Angeles again lights up, and Los Angeles County handled the most household hazardous waste at 23%. So we see that same pie chart that we just saw on the left there. And what we're going to do with this is we're going to break down those 33,350 tons of universal waste. So when we look at that universal waste breakdown, it ends up being 51% is other electronic devices and 37% is covered electronic devices. So electronic devices alone make up 88% of that universal waste tonnage. A couple of other important notes here include two waste streams that are particularly important to us right now, and those are lamps, which make up 2%, and aerosol cans, which make up 3%. So these wastes are especially important because lamps and non-empty aerosol cans don't have a distinct tracking system that we know of at this time. So it's great that household hazardous waste collection captures this data. And then just a quick note that the covered electronic devices are devices under the Covered Electronic Waste Recycling Program with CalRecycle. So next, we're going to hop into geographic information, which includes zoning, sensitive receptors, and CalEnviroScreen score, and we'll be breaking those down a little bit right now. So with geographic information, we've been looking at zoning, and zoning is completed on a city-by-city basis. This allows us to fix addresses at the same time. So if we can't find a particular address in a zoning area, it gives us a moment to pause, double check the address, and see what's going on. For geographic information, we've been able to use Google Maps to do a top-down view of cities and whatnot. And this lets us look at the proximity to water features, agriculture, hospitals, schools, parks, etc. And we've also been looking at the CalEnviroScreen score. And the CalEnviroScreen score is available from OEHA, which is the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment. So this is an example of zoning, and for the purposes of this, we've used the Cal EPA building. But once a zone is determined, more info is usually available by finding zoning definitions. So for example, on this particular screen, if you see that little blue hyperlink that says C3 Central Business District, if we click that, most likely we could find out more information about that zone. One of the ones that we've seen a couple times now has been ILG, which could be general industrial, for example. Now, some cities have a PDF instead of an interactive map. So what we can do in that case is use Google Maps and the zoning PDF side by side to find the address and then find that zone. However, this is sometimes tedious, so we're looking for ways to more efficiently gather this information. So here we have an example of CalEnviroscreen, and this tool is available for all to use. And for the purposes of the report, we're looking at the 4.0 percentile score. So I just want to walk through this with you real quick. So in the upper left-hand corner, we have the census tract, followed by the population in parentheses. Underneath that, we have the overall percentiles. And so the CalEnviroscreen 4.0 percentile, which is 78, that's what we're looking at for our report. Underneath that, there's also the pollution burden percentile and the population characteristics percentile. Those two scores together make up part of the CalEnviroscreen 4.0 percentile. And here we want to dive into the disadvantaged communities portion of this. So this map is available as a layer from the OEHA website. And right now our aim is to look into where recyclers and destination facilities are located in California in relation to this map layer. And again, this shows disadvantaged communities as defined in SB 535. SB 535 goes into effect on July 1st of 2022, and more information can be found on the OEHA website. So now I'd like to switch gears again to talk about data gaps that we've encountered so far with universal waste. And we'll start with incorrect addresses. So this could be as simple as switching digits, or maybe a minor misspelling, or maybe a road omission. So instead of putting, let's say, Sylvia Bauer Avenue, you just write Sylvia Bauer. Well, these seem like small mistakes, but this can affect zoning info and also our mapping efforts. And these errors do take time to fix, especially if there are multiple errors. Next, we have seen duplicates in at least one database. And then some of this information that we have is incomplete. I mentioned our dtsc battery survey information earlier. And while we appreciate the responses to that survey, that may not capture the whole picture. Next, inconsistent measurements with counts and weights can make reporting difficult, especially when we're working with graphs. And so we've seen those inconsistent measurements with electronic devices and PV modules. And again, those are photovoltaic modules. And finally, there may not be a tracking system for some of these waste streams at this time, such as with aerosol cans and lamps. We have reached out to some of the companies and departments available to see what tracking efforts may exist, but we haven't necessarily received a response that is useful for reporting purposes for both this PowerPoint and for the report itself at this time. But on a lighter note, there are some future endeavors that we're looking forward to. And we'll start with CERS, which is the California Environmental Reporting System. So CERS has Recyclable Materials Reports, or RMRs, and these reports fulfill the recycled on-site portion of Health and Safety Code 25135. CERS also has information on tiered permitting facilities, which fulfills the treated on-site portion of Health and Safety Code 25135. Now, that being said, the Recyclable Materials Reports are PDFs, and so we're currently working on a way to get the PDFs without having to click and open every single one. For a little bit of context, there are more than 1,000, and they may contain multiple wastes, and so this may take a moment or two. In addition, we're working on a way to capture tiered permitting amounts in an efficient manner. So those two things in mind, compiling this information will take some time, but at least we know where it lives. We are also looking forward to tackling unaccounted wastes. So just as we find data gaps, thinking of ways to fill in those data gaps. We're looking forward to capturing more than 1 year of data. So 1 year is a great start, but it can be rather difficult to find trends in just a year. So as we work backwards, we'll also be working forwards. So for now, we have the 2021 data. We'll be able to work backwards to 2020, 2019. And we'll have that information. But then once we have that, we'll also be working forwards as we get closer to the plan due in 2025. We are hoping to have interactive mapping available on our website next year so that folks can see where stuff is and maybe interact with some layers. And then finally, we're excited to look into contracts. A couple of examples of those include perhaps improving existing databases or working with universities or educational institutions for potential studies. So, like we mentioned at the beginning of the workshop, just want to reiterate that we do have a website that has more information and it gets updated, and it has our video about what we do, who we are. And so just that is going to be a great resource for you to check in with, I'd say pretty often. We also have an e-list where you can sign up to receive updates by email, such as for upcoming workshops. And finally, again, if you have questions or comments, we do want to hear from you. Please feel free to email us at dtsc_hwplan@dtsc.ca.gov. Well, thank you very much for attending. I have a couple of quick thank yous. Special thanks to Brittany Cardenas, our interpreter, and another special thanks to Elsa Lopez and Marcia Rubin for their help with making this workshop possible and for translating slides and helping with Q&A. Thanks to Russ Carter of Cal Recycle for his help with all things related to household hazardous waste and the Form 303. Thanks to the various DTSC staff who have assisted with the numbers and for offering resources in relation to various universal wastes. And finally, a special thank you to Felice Takamatsu and Ryan Dominguez for sitting on the panel with me to assist with answering questions and tracking questions and comments and such. So that being said, we will now open the Q&A box open for questions about today's topics.
Thanks, Sylvia. So we've had a few folks enter some questions for us to respond to. I'm going to move them to the answered portion, and I'm going to ask Ryan or anyone from the panel to respond to them verbally. Also, if you have a question, please feel free to raise your hand. And if you're on the phone and want to ask a question, you can raise your hand by pressing *9. So our first question comes from Jose Montoya. We are currently seeing an increase of confiscated tobacco product waste in school districts. Many are vape products, which are considered hazardous due to synthetic nicotine. Many of the school districts don't have guidance on what to do with this waste. Some schools report that they just throw them away. Is it possible to get guidance on this issue?
Thanks, Marcia. And yes, I think the best contact for that information and guidance is to get in touch with the Regulatory Assistance Office or the RAOs. I can put a link to the website and their contact information in the chat. And
okay, thanks, Ryan.
Thank you.
It looks like you were starting to type an answer into the chat.
I was just responding. Yep.
Okay. If you cancel it, then I can just move it to the answered portion.
Okay. Perfect.
All right. Thanks so much.
Yep.
Okay. Our next question comes from Chip Gribble. Can you talk about the QA/QC measures that DTSC takes to ensure data quality?
Sure. And I can start, and Sylvia probably can finish. For our QA/QC for this, we've contacted and worked with both Cal Recycle and some other internal units within DTSC to compare numbers. We were looking at 1 year, and so we did a cross-check of our data that we were seeing with theirs. And Sylvia, if you want to add anything to that.
I'd say that's a pretty good start. Like Ryan said, we have been double checking with other departments and agencies involved in the different universal waste types, and just kind of seeing, is our data matching up with theirs? And that being said, we're just open to continuing those conversations and making sure that we're reporting the correct stuff. So yeah, I'd say between what Ryan mentioned earlier and what we got here, we're just double checking all the time.
Good stuff. Thanks, Sylvia. Our next question comes from Comfort Agra, which I'm guessing that's the organization rather than a person's name. How will the utilization of CERS impact generators who use it for other programs?
I'm so sorry. Could you please repeat the question one more time?
How will the utilization of CERS impact generators who use it for other programs? If you need to refer to it to read it, you can look at the answered portion of the Q&A feature. That's how you'll see it.
I'll take that one. I think I'm not sure how it will impact other programs. We're going to use it for to collect data and to try and fill some data gaps for our report. And then we'll take that and then report out on it. Hopefully we'll be able to glean some quantity information from that database. I'm not sure if that answers your question or not. And if not, please put in clarification in the Q&A as well.
Okay, thanks so much, Ryan.
Mm-hmm.
There's another question about CERS from Billy Puck. For CERS, how would dtsc be able to capture the used oil directly from the generator instead of the used oil transporter in the future from underground storage tanks and or above ground storage tanks? The actual hazardous waste generators may not be able to provide all the documentation in CERS, not to mention some used oil generators that did not have to register in CERS if they won't generate more than the state threshold. That's an interesting question.
It is. I don't
think about it.
Yeah, I don't.
Okay.
I don't, Billy, to answer that, I don't know. I don't know if Sylvia does either. We've been, yeah, I'm not quite sure. That's a great question, probably to submit to us through our website and through our email address, so we can look into that one.
Yeah, just to kind of continue with what you're saying, Ryan, I think that's more about possibly CERS itself, and just seeing what kind of information dtsc could get from CERS that way. So yeah,
good point.
For anyone who isn't familiar with CERS, could you phrase the acronym?
Yes. So the acronym is the California Environmental Reporting System, and I believe I have that. I can pop that up on the screen real quick just so it's available. Yeah, that California Environmental Reporting System.
All right.
So, and we've been using CERS for, again, those recyclable materials reports and the tiered permitting. So that's kind of the basis of how we've been using CERS so far. That being said, there may be hazardous waste that we have not tackled yet that might fall under that unaccounted for waste. So we appreciate you bringing that to our attention. And while we don't necessarily have a concrete answer at this time, we will be looking into it. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And for any of the questions that haven't been answered and you're looking into it, will you put up like FAQs or something on your website? Is that how we can circle back?
Absolutely. We will be having an FAQ, and we do have these questions being logged so we can see which ones we have responded to, which one we haven't, which ones need additional research, if you will.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Thank you so much. Our next question is from Kashyap Thakur. How to gather information about the occupational worker exposure to hazardous chemicals from various universal waste in California. So I think this is a question about if we're gathering information about worker exposure in this endeavor.
Not to my understanding of the requirements of the statute.
Okay, so it's strictly the waste itself.
Yes.
And who would be gathering that kind of information? Would it be public health?
I don't know the answer to that one.
I
Okay.
believe I think that's kind of outside of the scope of what we're looking at for the purposes of this report and for the plan at this time.
Okay. Thanks, y'all. Our next question comes from an anonymous attendee. The survey results result in changes to the universal waste regulations for small and or large quantity handlers of universal waste.
That seems like more of a planning type question. We're just, our minds have been on collection of the information. And collection of the data.
So maybe that's something in the future that, we'll be able to better respond to once the plan is more formally comes together.
Yeah,
okay.
I think so.
Okay, thanks, Ryan.
Mm-hmm.
Our next question is from Billy Puck. You may want to connect. Oh, it's a suggestion. So you may want to connect with the CalCoupa Forum Board. Looks like we work quite closely with them on a lot of our work. So great suggestion. And Ryan, you're nodding, so it sounds like you may have already connected.
Yeah, we've been working with some of the Coupas and reaching out to them. Yes.
Excellent, good stuff. Okay, our next two questions are from anonymous attendees. So I'll just I'll go one after the next without sharing who the question's coming from. With the potential use of SIRS data, will DTSC be imposing other data collection tasks to UPAs or the regulated businesses?
That's also kind of a planning question, I think. And right now, we're currently just trying to figure out what information exists and what doesn't. So that's kind of a future question. And we don't control the SIRS database. We're more accessing the information out of it. That's a Cal EPA. We've been working with Cal EPA to get access to that database and get information, and collect the data from it. And so, I don't know that we have an answer if we're going to be imposing other data collection tasks or the regulated businesses at this time.
Okay, thanks, Ryan. Good to know. And then our last question for right now is, will any of these potential universal waste data fields be built into the SIRS Next Gen project?
Go ahead, Sylvia.
Okay, so we have talked to the folks behind the SIRS Next Gen project, and while we were looking for this data, they said if we had suggestions for things to possibly include, to let them know. But again, at this time, we're not part of building that SIRS Next Generation or anything like that. And so we can't necessarily say whether these universal waste data fields will be built into the SIRS Next Gen project. So unfortunately, again, it's probably more of a SIRS question itself.
Yeah, and that said, and we can submit suggestions for that program or that project. Our understanding is they're still receiving recommendations for data fields or just different things that it could potentially do. So if you do have comments, please send them to us and or recommendations, and we can try and submit them here pretty soon.
Okay, thanks, Ryan. Good to know. And, that's probably part of why we're having this workshop right now, is so that people can, have some idea of what's taking place and, get engaged and share your suggestions, ask questions, all of that good stuff that makes our work better. I want to check in with our interpreter, Brittany, ask if there are any questions on the Spanish line right now, if we have any folks joining us on our Spanish channel. Okay, thanks so much, Brittany. Our next question comes from another anonymous attendee. And they ask, is there a work group being created for this report? And can priority populations get involved? What are the future plans for outreach?
Sure. So work being created. Currently, we are just doing a big data dive, and we have not created any work groups outside of our current unit. The intent of this report is to establish this baseline understanding of where the status of hazardous waste management in the state. And if you are interested in getting involved with this, please send us a note. We can reach out and talk. The future plans for outreach, really what we're hoping to do is go through these workshops, present the available information as we learn it, and establish call them work plans or strategies to obtain information that we do not have. And yes, including priority populations is something that we are hoping to do. So please get in touch with us because it's an important project, and we want to try and include everybody that we can in the development of the plan in the future.
Great, thanks, Ryan. And should people contact you directly, or
I think right.
I understand that you're hiring for an outreach professional in the near future, or is it
not in our unit? Our unit
not in your unit.
Yeah, okay. Is full.
Okay.
But the best way to contact us, I think, would be through our email address. Yeah, the email address is probably the best way to go. It auto logs everything, and that way we can see it and tracks it. Yeah.
Yeah. Sounds good. And also our public participation specialist has, a lot of ties throughout the state. She's currently supporting the project right now. So, people can reach out to her as well directly if you already have been in contact with her. So we'll definitely be working closely with Ryan in the public participation program at dtsc to develop, really strong engagement plans so that, all the people most directly impacted are, part of the process.
Yeah. And before we go, I like to do a poll because we want to know who you are. And there are going to be more workshops coming up. So we want to make sure that we link you into the correct workshop. So for right now, I'll put up the poll.
To add on a little bit as well, this project is starting with the report, and this is a years-long endeavor. It's a years-long effort, and so it's not ending when this report is due in March. We are continuing it throughout the foreseeable future. We have the plan that's due in 2025. And we are to repeat the report and the plan every 3 years. And as such, we're going to be identifying areas and for additional research and that we need to go and chase down. So there will be a lot of opportunities for participation.
Great.
So we had 72% of the group participate so far. I'm gonna end the poll and get us the results. So we have some EJ groups. We would really like to have more EJ groups. So if you know of any EJ groups or employees that would like to participate in future workshops, we would like to get in contact with them. Please send their contact information by emailing us to the present email. I think there's some other questions. I'm not sure if you're going to go back to those.
Yeah, we can. I mean, we can continue. Because we've got a bit more time on the agenda here. So we'll go with the next question from Billy Puck again. How would dtsc capture the hazardous waste generated from very small quantity generators in this plan? Or is the plan excluding these?
I don't think it's excluding them. It's a pretty specific question, and let us get a more specific answer. Yeah. And are you asking about the plan or the report? And for the report, I think we haven't distinguished between the size of the generator and the report.
And is the report coming prior to the plan? So,
yes.
So basically,
Right.
Information that you glean from the report will be used to determine the plan.
Yeah. So the report that we're doing is this initial look. What information is available to report out by March of 2023. We're going to take that information and find the data gaps, receive comments, and then use that report to then fill as work plans to fill those data gaps, and then that will inform for the hazardous waste management plan that's due in 2025. So this is step one of many. Okay,
great. Thanks, Ryan.
Mm-hmm.
We have another great question from Jeff. A great question from Jeff Escabel. CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, be associated with this endeavor?
Good question. I imagine it will be in some capacity. This endeavor itself, I don't think would be considered a project under CEQA, but there are aspects of like facilities and location of them that involve CEQA. So it's a good question. I don't have an answer to that at what capacity it would be right now.
Okay, so possibly, but that will be determined sometime in the future. Interesting. Yes. Okay, another question from Kashyap Thakur. Is there a way to find out the contact information to learn about the potential occupational worker exposure to hazardous chemicals from universal waste in California?
Yes, we can look into that and try and get back to you about who the contact would be. That I'm not exactly sure who the contact would be for that.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks, Ryan.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Maggie Johnson says, sorry if this was discussed earlier, I missed it. Is dtsc considering using sales data to estimate universal waste generation for waste, which are consumer products like batteries or CFLs? That's an interesting thought.
That is an interesting thought. And I think, yeah, that's another good example of a question to submit to us. So it gets logged and we can look into that for the plan.
Okay. Lots of ways to gather data.
Yeah.
If I can kind of hop on there too.
Yeah, go ahead, Sylvia.
Perfect. Thank you. So just in terms of this question as well, but at this time with the data just presented, so we'll have our slides available up on our website, and one of the slides has the databases that we've used so far. In terms of databases used so far for the purposes of this presentation, I do not believe that we used sales data, but I do appreciate you reaching out and possibly giving us another potential way to look into this. So thank you very much.
Yeah, that's great. Okay. Elizabeth, I hope I'm pronouncing all of your names correctly. So apologies to anyone whose name I've mispronounced. Elizabeth Ruan. In the plan, will there be any attention to sustainable hazardous waste management options, such as reuse, recycling, siting incinerators in California, so we aren't relying on transportation to out-of-state facilities?
Let me.
I can start with this.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so first of all, thanks for recognizing that that is a planned question. However, thank you very much for possibly giving us another, like I said earlier, another thing to kind of look into when it comes to the plan. So while we can't necessarily answer that in regards to report data, we do appreciate comments like this that give us routes of potential research. So again, I'm sorry that we can't necessarily answer how this might be addressed in the plan, but we do appreciate these kinds of comments. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. And to that point, Sylvia, thank you. One area in the plan that we are looking at is source reduction. So that is one of the big key elements to the planning portion of our project.
Great. Okay, thanks, y'all. Another question from Billy. VSQG would have an important component to determine the environmental justice in the plan. Most of the VSQGs could have been captured in the Cal Recycle Form 303 as part of household hazard, I'm guessing that acronym HHW is household hazardous waste, due to Health and Safety Code 25218.1E. Oh, just a comment. So y'all can take note of that if you weren't aware. A lot of great information coming in, a lot of great suggestions and great questions.
Yeah.
We don't have any other questions in our Q&A feature currently. Brittany, should we do one last check on our Spanish line? Okay, thanks so much. Anyone, if you'd like to verbalize your question, you can raise your hand. I will see you raise your hand and prompt you to unmute. Going once, going twice. Okay, if you're on the phone and want to ask a question, you can press *9. Otherwise, we'll close out the meeting and take back some of this information and be following up with the information that we couldn't provide today.
Ryan, did you mention what the next workshop will be?
I have not. I have not yet. Tentatively.
Please do.
Yeah. We're looking for the next workshop, we're looking at manifested waste. And so we will be looking at the hazardous waste tracking system and explaining how we are obtaining the information for that side of the waste management. So we're looking at the generation and some of the destination facility information in that presentation. And we're shooting for, I think it's third week of July, if I'm not mistaken. Let's see, let me check my calendar real quick. Yeah, I believe it's the third week of July.
So all of you who got this invitation will be also receiving the invitation to that workshop. And we encourage you for you to share that invitation with whoever you feel will give us good information and share, just like all of you did today. You know, your comments, your questions are really going to be able to help us put this whole plan together.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any last words?
No, I really do appreciate everybody attending today. Everybody in our unit is really excited about this work and this report and plan and the opportunity that we have to establish a living program and iterative process for this in the future.
Yeah, and if you want to go back to the presentation, we are recording and it will be on the website. So,
yes. Oh.
Yeah.
And just like Ryan said, thank you all very much for attending. We appreciate the questions and the comments. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So at this time, I will end this webinar. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.